Kalish, why should people listen to this episode of Pod Friends?
Well, Matt, we just went down a journey. We covered all of the hits. We talked about Survivor. We talked about bagels, maybe little seeds, baby. We talked about my teaching and my coaching experience. And I think we tie it all together in a little knot at the end. And I think we start to understand a little bit more about why I have all these different interests and how they sort of tie together. And I never even really thought about how they tie together, but I think they do. So I learned about myself. So if I could learn about myself, and I thought I knew myself, but maybe not as well as I thought I did, you could get to know me through this whole episode. Listen to Kalish talk about all the things that he does. We talked about my childhood, my college days, high school, everything. We hit all the different phases of my life.
Yeah, planting some seeds left and right,
seeds
all over the place. The seed is strong.
Don't tell them that my seed was all over the place. Then they're not going to listen.
We'll see. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pod Friends. My name is Matt Scott, and I am just so happy to be here with you for another episode of Pod Friends before we wrap up this season. There's still one more to go after this week, and I am thrilled to tell you about it and to ask you all to be part of it in a very special way in a minute. But this week's episode features none other than the one, the only... Mr. Seeds, baby? Could we call him that? We talk a lot about seeds in this episode with the one and only Jordan Kalish, who you heard from in the intro. And just shout out to Jordan for this conversation, which went a lot of places. We talked about his love of Survivor and fandom and being part of this Rob Has Podcast community for, I want to say, about the last decade, if not more. We talk about the Mafia games he's hosted and how he aims to connect with the community. We talk about his life as a teacher, including in this pandemic, and as a coach. We talk about so much in this episode, and a lot gets mentioned. There are a lot of S's that are mentioned. Seeds, that's one of them. Shabbat, that's another one. School, he's a teacher. Sports, Survivor, structure, all of it. There's so much to Jordan, or should I say Coach Kalish, and I am thrilled to dive in. But before diving in on the topic of sports, I just want to give a big shout out to one of my at times co-hosts. I won't call her a former co-host, but at times co-hosts. Grace Leader is the host of the Off Speed podcast, where you could actually hear Jordan making a number of appearances. But Off Speed is Rob Has a Podcast, this network's official sports pod. And each week, Grace explores a different sports topic like roller derby or golf or ultimate frisbee or whatever it might be, and slows things down to examine sports in a way that's digestible for someone like me, who, despite being a wrestling podcast host, not a huge sports fan these days. Grew up playing a lot of sports, not a big sports fan. So I love the Off Speed podcast, love Grace, and I would encourage folks, just as we talk about sports here, as we're in a little bit of a sports mindset, to subscribe at robhaswebsite.com/offspeedfeed. But also, speaking of Survivor, the season's coming up, and Jordan, he's the host of This Week in Survivor History, but also next week's guest has a special relationship to Survivor, and I'm going to tell you who next week's guest is now because I want to ask you to do something to be part of it. Next week's guest is none other than the know-it-all himself, or one half of the know-it-alls himself, Stephen Fishback, here on the podcast, having a conversation about him, about his life, diving in. I've asked the Rob Has a Podcast patrons already in Patreon-only groups for just question suggestions, and that's another reason to become a patron. robhasawebsite.com/Patreon. But also, if you have any questions for Steven that you want me to ask him, just send an email, robhasawebsite.com. I don't even remember my email address sometimes, but it is podfriends@robhasawebsite.com. And that is one way where if you send me an email the Sunday or Monday after the episode comes out, we'll be all set. I'll get it. I'll try to work it in. And I'm very excited to talk with Steven for the season finale of Pod Friends. And there's so much more I could ask you to do, but I just want to ask you to subscribe, robhaswebsite.com/podfriends feed, or subscribe wherever you're listening. Please leave those 5 stars. Please leave a review. Please leave a rating, all of it, because next week's episode is going to be a very special one. It's going to be action-packed, featuring the conversation with Steven, but I also have a number of voicemails I'm sitting on, so I'm going to check those out and maybe play some of those. And if you want to leave a voicemail, you could be part of next week's episode potentially. Just do it at speakpipe.com/podfriends. That's speakpipe.com/podfriends. All of these links and more are in the show notes, the show description, if you want to check that out wherever you're listening or watching. But now, without further ado, let's welcome this week's guest. Making his way to the podcast, hailing from Riverdale, New York, he is a coach, a teacher, a host, and player of Mafia, a sports lover, and a Survivor super fan, renowned for his longtime presence in the Rob Has a Podcast community as the host of This Week in Survivor History. He knows his Survivor history, but do you really know him? Please welcome the man behind the seeds, baby, Coach Jordan Kalish. Seeds.
Yes.
So, could you walk me through the legend of Seeds, baby, just to start out? I'm a Seeds fan, and I don't normally get to talk to people who have Seeds connections.
Well, Matt, I was born a young Jewish boy in New York.
Yes.
And my people tend to appreciate a good bagel. And I've been eating bagels my whole life. Yes, I'm starting really from the beginning here. So anyway, I've been eating bagels for a long time. My favorite bagel happens to be the Everything Bagel. Mm-hmm. I've written a poem about it. It's the only bagel I'll really order at a bagel store. Yeah. So this came up when a good friend of both of ours, Puya, and I were doing a bagel tier list Tuesday on his stream. Mm-hmm. And we both agreed that the Everything Bagel was the top tiered bagel. And it came out during this podcast, since the bagels were the topic of conversation, much like they've been the topic of conversation on this podcast so far, mm-hmm. That I like to do something which is to me, it's logical, but it's a little strange. I save the seeds that come at the bottom of the bagel bag. I mm-hmm. put them in a Tupperware, and mm-hmm. I put them in my fridge just in case there's ever an issue with a bagel where it's a little bit underseeded, which sometimes you get. Sometimes you get a bagel just not enough seeds, baby. Yeah, and it's distressing when this happens. Or maybe somebody brings bagels to my house and they have no taste, and they bring just a plain bagel or not Everything Bagels. I need to have some extra seeds. And by the way, I was doing this, I think, before Trader Joe's started selling the everything but the bagel seasoning. So. Wow. I put them in a Tupperware, and this came up, I believe, on Rhap, where either Rob or Akiva had listened to the tier list or watched the stream or something, and they were talking about how crazy it is that I do this. And I made a video, I posted it to Twitter, of me with an underseeded bagel. Yes. And I take out my Tupperware, I shook it, and I said, "Seeds, baby," and it became a thing, became a shirt. There's merch. Ooh. I've seen someone. I believe Akiva told me he ran into an RHAP fan once at an airport who was wearing a Seeds Baby shirt. So it has truly become a global phenomenon.
Okay, so look, I appreciate you walking through that. I have to say, as someone from the North Jersey area originally, Shout out to West Orange, New Jersey. I would go. Well, there are a lot. The bagel debate is a big debate. You know, like where has the best bagels? Is it Hot Bagels Abroad? Is it Sonny's Bagels? Is it whatever? I have my entire life, Jordan. This is why I needed to have you on Pod Friends. The sole reason I need to have you on Pod Friends. Nothing else. There's nothing else about you. Nothing else that I want to talk about. Just everything bagels, because we share a love of everything bagels. I don't know why I feel like I'm getting a little emotional right now.
I thought you were going to go the other way with that, where your big confession was going to be that, Jordan, I have never once eaten a bagel. And I was going to say, how is that? I was ready to be just like, that would be the craziest thing I ever heard. How have you not had a bagel growing up in North Jersey? But Matt, I appreciate you saying that. I know I'm not alone. I believe I think that's a pretty ubiquitous opinion that everything bagels are the best bagel. It's all the perfect seeds coming together. I talk about it. As some people know, I wrote a poem about about everything bagels and seeds, which I once read on the Token Cheens recap on our HAP. And the poem is about how you have all of these things that on their own, yes, they're good, but when they come together, they make the perfect bagel, which I think is sort of a microcosm of New York City in general. You have so many different people and cultures coming together. Boom, put it on a bagel. It becomes the perfect mix.
Wow. Okay. Whoa. This is deep and philosophical. I wasn't expecting it to go there.
We've gotten deep in the schmear.
deep in the seeds. So do you have like the poem off the top of your head? I don't know.
It's a very long poem. I don't think anyone listening to this wants me to read my 5-minute poem.
How does it start to refresh people?
Well,
I'll make sure somehow that people know where they could go to hear the full poem.
I got to get the Google Doc up for this, Matt. I didn't know we were
get the Google Doc up
today.
Okay, wait. Here's the thing. So Jordan, get the Google Doc pulled up. If you have the link, if it's if I could have it too, drop it in our little chat here behind the scenes. People, we have a chat as we record. Believe it or not, drop it in. We'll take a look. Maybe we'll come back to the seeds poem later. Because that could be a good way to close us out, to have some of those, some of your bars. But are you a poetry person?
I'm not. I don't write anything. I barely read.
Well, okay. Well, so look. This is why the real reason that you're on Pod Friends beyond the seeds is just that you're incredible, Jordan. Like, people know you, but do they really know you, Jordan? Do they know the ins and outs? Maybe they know the ins and outs. But
I think they know the exterior. They know the seedy facade that I've liked to show to the I shouldn't have said that, but they know they know the outside. They don't know what's inside.
Yeah.
The bagel, to stick with the metaphor. I do think actually what you see is often what you get. I like to make corny jokes. I like to kind of be in charge and host things like Mafia or different games and the trivia games that I've done on RHAP. So I think the RHAP audience at least knows a lot about me from the things that I've done on the show. But there are certain things that I don't really talk about all that much. I think people know I'm a teacher. People know I'm a coach, but don't really talk about that all that much on the podcast. But that's really the majority of my day. And I'm a camp athletic director, so I'm constantly coaching and working with kids. So that's really what I'm doing with a lot of my time. So people know me a little, but I don't know if they know the whole package.
You're the Daniela Di Lorenzo of RHAP, I hear. Captain of sports.
Captain of sports. I would have absolutely also probably lost to Aris on Survivor. So yeah, I think that checks.
There we go. But look, someone needs to count the number of mentions of seeds here, because
she's double D, I'm double seeds.
Look, Jordan, I can't follow up. You're all seeds. You're not even double seeds. You are the seed. And
are you saying I'm everything?
You are everything. You're everything, Jordan. You are everything. And speaking of you being everything, okay, starting with your seeds. To go
Yes.
again, someone really needs to count the mentions of that word. Thank you so
Don't
much for
play
that.
a seeds drinking game on this podcast. You will not make it
Do
through.
not do it as a drinking game, but you could eat one seed for every time that
That's
we,
true.
or one everything bagel every time we mention it.
Well,
What
that would
are
be a lot
your
of bagels.
seeds, Jordan? Where I need to go back. This is the thing. Like you, people know you, and I think the thing I relate to with with what you mentioned so far is like when you're on podcasts. The longer you're on podcasts, even if you're not talking about yourself, like people really pick up a lot of things about you. You have been around RHAP a lot longer than I have, so there's been more of an opportunity to pick up more and more about you. But going way back, take a step back, Jordan, into Baby Kalish.
Baby
The
Kalish.
when the seeds baby was a baby seed. Wait, no,
So before I was born,
I wasn't.
well, my parents met, and
I'm so annoyed, Jordan, because I'm just like, come on, seeds. Just this podcast might have an explicit rating on it, just for all that. But what was it like going back, growing up? You mentioned being like a young Jewish kid in the New York area, but like, where did you grow up? Let's just start there.
Sure,
let's walk through your past. Lay
let's
down on the Pod Friends couch.
Yes, I see. And then we're the little two icons that are up there.
That's us.
Yeah, I grew up in Westchester, New York, which is a county that's it's basically the suburbs of New York City. I grew up with a younger brother who's 2.5 years younger than me that I'm very close with, and my parents, and we basically I lived in a school district where it's a very small town. The whole town was like 1 square mile, and there's one elementary school, one middle school, one high school. So basically everyone I went to school with from kindergarten, unless they moved, and we did have some, new kids come in, obviously, but I basically knew the same people growing up from kindergarten through 12th grade, which I think in certain ways was a good thing. A lot of my really close friends that are still my best friends, or people that I've been best friends with either since before elementary school, because they were, one of them was a family friend who ended up being my roommate a couple of years ago. And he's, we've been, best friends for years. Another one of my best friends, like we grew up with a shared backyard. One of my best friends, who I'm now the godfather to his daughter, actually, we've been friends since first grade. So the fact that I've known all these people since I was so young, and basically my whole life, it's really created a lot of close friendships. People, I think a lot of people that I meet tend to have, their college friends or their best friends or their work friends or people that they've met after high school are their closest friends. And I have friends like that as well. And a lot of people who I've met through RHAP would fit that category. But the people that I've really known the longest are the ones that I, see the most often. And it's really like, it's almost like having a bunch of siblings, because you've known each other for so long. Like one of my friends, I would say one of my current friends I've known longer than my brother, who's going to be 30 years old this year.
What?
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
Wow. That's interesting, because I think of thinking of different people in the RHAP universe, but also people I've interviewed for Pod Friends. What you mentioned makes me think of Aaron Robertson, actually, because it's almost, I don't know if I'd say it's the complete opposite, but it's so different in the sense that we talked about just him moving around at different points growing up and being all over the place, which also means that you, like, with that, you have a fresh start wherever you go. So like you could learn from the last place where you were for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then choose to be whoever you want in this new place. In your case, not only did you grow up like with the same people, but it was such a small town and such a small environment that, like, to me, it seems like you couldn't really like restart things. But like, what was that like growing up in such an intimate kind of
I agree with that. So I think for me, like, being in school as a kid, it was, again, you are running into a lot of the same people. And I think I was lucky that I never felt as a kid that I really needed a fresh start, because I was lucky enough to have made, a really close group of friends at school. I liked my teachers. I liked my town. And there was a lot of positive things about it. Looking back, I think there are some drawbacks to that. And I think one of the things is you're really, when you're in such a small community, you're not really meeting so many different people. And
Yeah.
while it's been a positive in terms of like keeping a lot of the friends that I had when I was younger, when basically the same people from kindergarten through 12th grade, it can get a little monotonous. I think you don't really get as many perspectives. And this was sort of a, my school, I would say, was like 50 to 60% white Jewish kids.
Yeah.
A lot of like pretty high percentage of like white Italian and Irish kids. And then we had some we had some people who, it was a very small percentage minority school. And I think I wasn't really I wasn't really like shown other perspectives. And I have friends who were who were either minorities or they were just like from different towns or different states, but it just wasn't that common in my town to meet people that weren't like, Jewish, and like went to my Hebrew school growing up. And those were the people, like my really close knit group of friends. It's a bunch of Jewish kids, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I've since, like, from college and RHAP and all of these things that I've done since growing up, I've had a lot, I've been exposed to a lot of other people who, are from different places and different cultures. And I think when you learn more about different people and you get other perspectives, you grow as a person because of that. So I think there are drawbacks looking back on it. And my mom always says to me, like, I wish, there's some part of me wishes that you had gone to a school that was a little bit more diverse.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really interesting to think about kind of like what you're explaining with how you grew up, because maybe it's just a thing with a lot of places in New York, New Jersey, probably a bunch of other places around that. But that demographic breakdown that you kind of gave of your school even is so familiar, because I even think of like the different schools I went to. And I went to, like, I've talked about this on Pod Friends, but I went to not Catholic, went to Catholic school, K to 12, like through the end of high school, and then kind of like went out to college where it was, I don't know if it's necessarily like a lot more diverse, but what was interesting is like I always feel like in where I grew up in New Jersey, there was like this weird melting pot. And I call it a weird melting pot because like you had a strong Jewish community, you had strong like Irish Catholic community, but also strong Italian Catholic community and like all these other groups. And it's an interesting place to grow up and a way to grow up. But I am like interested in this part of kind of the Jewish community you built. And because one thing I've always appreciated and also kind of been jealous of, to the point where when I was like in third grade, I was like, Mom, Dad, I need to convert to Judaism. Like, let me do that. It's because like there's such like a strong community. Look, I was willing to do it at the time. I'm a hard worker, Jordan. I might have been Jewish at this point. Like, you never know. You never know. But I'm like curious what that community was like, especially for people who are like on the outside, looking in. What was that like for you as you were growing up? And I guess I'm sure we'll talk. I mean, I'm even curious about what that looks like. As you grow up more and more as an adult. But yeah.
So I would say that, different Jewish communities look very different. The one that I was a part of was, and I'll start with my family. I have very, very few people in my family who would consider themselves religious, and I would be included in that. I'm not a religious person at all. I mean, being Jewish was definitely part of how I grew up, and it's important to me. But in terms of, being, traditional and religious, that's just not who I am at all. So Reform Judaism, it's basically the least traditional form of Judaism. There are some people who their whole identity and everything they do is based on, what they're doing within the Reformed Jewish community. And I would actually consider those people religious because they're, that's like their whole life, or such a huge part of their life. For me, it was more of something that was cultural. Like, we celebrated the holidays, we learned about the traditions, and, we ate a lot of food. And just, from going to Hebrew school as a kid, where we're not really learning how to speak Hebrew, but you're learning how to read Hebrew. I can still look at the Hebrew alphabet and sound out most words. I don't know what they mean, but you're sort of learning it for your bar mitzvah. And I'm actually going to my cousin's bar mitzvah tomorrow, so I'll get to see how he stacks up to me. He goes to a conservative temple, which is not politically conservative, religiously conservative, which is definitely more than what I was used to as a kid growing up. So I'll be there tomorrow morning, but so basically,
thanks for the invite, by the way.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. If Darren, if you're listening, you should have invited Matt to your bar mitzvah. He's a big Survivor fan. He loves Survivor. Big. Happy
birthday, Darren.
I don't know if he's ever listened to the podcast, but he has, I think, watched all of the last couple seasons. So what I was saying is that when I grew up in my community, I went to Hebrew school and learned the Hebrew alphabet. And again, you're learning about the traditions and the holidays, and you're a lot of the kids who were at my temple also went to my high school. There were some that didn't. There were some from the surrounding towns as well. And the community that I was a part of, this Reform temple, was way more involved in the the different charity aspects of Judaism. It's charity is a big thing that they teach within a lot of religions, Judaism being one of them. So we did something called Project Ezra, where a lot of the older the senior citizens from the Lower East Side, which is a heavily Jewish community, would come up on a bus to our temple, and they would have meals, and we would help serve them and hang out with them and talk to them. And they always got a kick out of talking to kids, because a lot of them, maybe their grandkids live in different parts of the country and they don't get to see them as much. So it was always fun to them and for them. And we did midnight rides, which is when we would go into Manhattan, basically in a truck or in a van, and we would hand out food to homeless people. So that's what our temple was really more about, community and giving back to the community. So that was really the aspect that we were really taught when we were there, more so than the religious part. Of course we did, I was bar mitzvahed and we celebrated the holidays as well, which is a little bit more religious. But if you came to one of my Passover Seders, for example, basically we would kind of yada through the story, and then it's time to eat. So it was more about just getting together with family, getting together with friends. And that's really how I would describe my Jewish community growing up. And since then, I actually coach at a Jewish school. I have been coaching there for years. And again, I'm really, I'm there as a coach. I'm not really there for the different that's a pretty hardcore Jewish education. They're really learning Hebrew, and they all go to Israel in 8th grade and 12th grade. So, but I'm just really not as much part of their Jewish education, but they take a lot of pride from being on a Jewish sports team, and with the cross country team that I've coached, it's a very successful Jewish sports team.
That's interesting to think about, just that piece of it, which is being a proud Jewish sports team, because I mean, from the limited sports knowledge, in particular, and thinking about different areas, it's always a big deal when someone I'm thinking of pro wrestling right now, Jordan, where I'm Bill Goldberg is famously one big time wrestler, dominating everything and everyone, legendary Hall of Famer, all that stuff.
He's a Hall of Famer.
Okay, look at this. Look, he's a see, people are probably just grossed out at my attempt to say holla, but he's a Hall of Famer. So, and I think that you're horrible. So horrible. Oh my
this is
God.
what I do. This is what I do. We have a serious conversation, and then I make a joke about some sort of Jewish bread.
I mean, look, and I think that's the thing. It's just look, I love challah bread, first of all. Now I feel like I'm just now I'm trying to explain my show my love of the Jewish community. I love lots of communities, all the communities. I'm gonna go back to Bill Goldberg, a Hall of Famer and a mensch also, and he is he was, I think at the time, I wasn't a wrestling fan in the late 90s. I was just a kid, but it was a big deal that he was Jewish. People still talk about it. And so to me, that's kind of one of my reference points for how notable it is to be a Jew in sports at times, especially in professional sports or just in sports where, like, I guess you also break through a lot of stereotypes that people probably have about Jews too. But I mean, I don't know. I'm curious, like, how that functions from your perspective, because you know the sports world, you know the Jewish, you know it all, Jordan. That's a whole other thing that we have to talk about. But you do know it all, and this is one of the topics that you know about.
The funny thing is, I actually did teach a lesson once that was about Jewish stereotypes in sports.
About Bill Goldberg.
We actually didn't talk about Bill Goldberg. I'm not a big pro wrestling guy, which you may have gotten from the time that you guys were going to was it it wasn't WrestleMania, but it was something at the Barclays Center, and I had no idea what you guys were. Survivor Series. It sounds like something I would like, but maybe not. I don't know. No. I'd have to maybe be. I did go to WrestleMania once, and I will tell you, I had a great time. My friend had an extra ticket from work. It was amazing. It was at MetLife in Jersey. And it was a lot of fun. I wore my Mayor of Slamtown buff, which was the only wrestling thing that I had to wear. So I did it, and it was the one place I could like wear that, and outside of Survivor events where I would have like fit in with the rest of the crowd. It was great. It was a lot of fun. But back to this lesson I taught. I actually was sort of a Hebrew school teacher for a year where I wasn't really teaching Hebrew. I was teaching, I think I had one section of Hebrew, but it was more just teaching the letters, which I know. I was teaching Jewish American history. This was, I think maybe, was it the first year I was a teacher, and this was what I was doing before I was coaching? I think it had to have been before I was coaching. And I was also teaching a 7th grade sports and basketball class in their gym. They had a gym at the temple. So I was teaching this class, but I was teaching with a guy who I actually did happen to go to high school with, who was the youth director at the temple. And it was basically my job to run the sports programs, but he would always talk about, he would usually for the first maybe 10, 15 minutes, talk about Jewish values and how they could relate to sports and athletics. And one of the things that we sort of co-taught the lesson was about Jewish stereotypes in sports and how, and we also talked about people who have broken those stereotypes. And, we talked about Sandy Koufax, who was one of the greatest pitchers of all time and was a World Series winner and famously didn't pitch on Yom Kippur during the World Series. We talked about Ryan Braun, who at the time was kind of a beloved home run hitter. It turns out he was a steroid guy, unfortunately. But
like the rest of them.
Hank Greenberg, the Hebrew Hammer, these are all baseball players, and there really are. I mean, if you look at professional sports, it's sort of there are Julian Edelman, who's Super Bowl winning wide receiver. There are definitely some professional athletes in sports, but we weren't just talking about professional athletes. We were talking about Israel has a very good wheelchair basketball team. So I've actually met somebody on the team who's done programs at my school. And they've had people who've been champions and gold medalists in the Olympics. So the stereotype of the Jewish athlete, I think, is maybe small, maybe a little bit tentative or meek. That's like sort of a stereotype that obviously isn't true when you really meet a lot of Jewish people, but that is a stereotype that exists. And the lesson was about about learning about the stereotypes and then sort of refuting them.
One, it's amazing. It's powerful to hear that it's so interesting to me to kind of like put the pieces together of what you've shared too, because like I have a lot of friends who are more culturally Jewish, but also not really like religious, but at the same time still engaged in the community in a variety of ways. So I think that that's one thing that really jumps out to me, even in what you're sharing, where it's very clear how that identity influences or informs even what you're doing now to this day. And then, breaking down the stereotypes in sports, it's really interesting to think of like how much sports is part of your journey, like how, just to think about that dynamic. But the thing that I'm like curious about is like this, like for a lot of people, you're in high school and you're about to graduate high school, and that often serves as a pivot point. So maybe like you've defined yourself and been with with a lot of the same people in community like for your whole life, but you kind of could like go off and do something else with your life and become a whole new person. And like I'm kind of curious, like if you knew what you were going to do with your life at that point, or if you were attempting to run away from all of it, or if you're like, okay, I'm gonna stick with like this community and not completely desert them and never see them again for the rest of my life.
So here's the thing. A lot of things about my life, I think maybe were defined, like the friendships that I made. I never would want to break these friendships. These are people that I think I'm going to know my whole life. And I want to.
I love that.
Did I know? I did not know what I was going to do. I originally went to college as a business major. I ended up transferring twice and switching majors. I went from business to sort of undecided major to then finally physical education. Even though I had all of these friendships, I still wanted to go out and you know, I didn't go to college with anyone that I was close with before. There were maybe some people from high school that I knew, but I wasn't friendly with. So I think so many of my friends that I have now are through RHAP and Survivor. Like really a lot of my very, very close friends that I hang out with all the time and talk to just as much as anybody else are people that I've met through that world. So I would say a lot of things were maybe defined about me, and I don't think that was a bad thing, because it's not like I was like running with a bad crowd and I haven't been able to shake them. These are, you know, they're my friends, I consider them great people, and they're people that I'm like proud to be friends with. But I've also made a lot of new friends as well, and I've sort of gone on this. Like, I was in college for 5.5 years. It was definitely longer than the 4-year journey, because I kept switching and transferring. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Even after I graduated, I was like, do I really want to be a teacher? And I was working for this like after school sports program as like the program director. And I really didn't like it. That was in Manhattan. And then I came back to teaching, and I decided that it is what I wanted to do. And even still, I sometimes think to myself, as much as I love coaching, do I really love teaching? And sometimes I think that there's other things that I might want to do. So I'm still, I think, not really 100%, where I'm going to end up. And I do really love a lot about teaching. But I always think to myself, is there something else? So the thing is, I don't know what that is. So I'm not planning on leaving or anything. I do enjoy what I'm doing, and it's very worthwhile, because again, you're teaching. I think people, sometimes dismiss physical education. It's gym class. It's not that serious. And, you are playing a lot of games, and you're not, sitting at a desk and learning math or reading and writing, which are all very, very important skills, but you are learning important life skills like teamwork, like sportsmanship. Physical fitness obviously is something that is a problem in this country. And I think my job as an elementary school phys ed teacher is to show kids, to give kids a positive perspective about sports and exercise, because that could turn into a lifelong passion for exercise. And, we have an obesity epidemic in this country. And, if kids are growing up with a positive outlook on phys ed and sports, hopefully, and a lot of it is nutrition too. So health education is very important too. And I think that's definitely something that's lacking in a lot of school districts around the country.
Wow. Wow. And I love this. I love even like where we're going, because for me, as we go along, I feel like I might be on kind of like I might be on the journey with the listeners in a big way, because I'm like, oh crap, like there's so many more things where I'm like, oh my gosh, Jordan and I have that in common. Like my brother-in-law is a phys ed teacher on the high school level in New Jersey, and it's like there's the physical aspect of it too, like you mentioned. Then there's the classroom teaching. I'm curious, especially just from hearing his stories, especially from your perspective as a phys ed teacher and coach, but I'm guessing maybe the coach side of things was a little bit less relevant here. What was the pandemic like for you as a teacher? We famously hear just about how rough it is, or how rough it has been and continues to be for teachers. But yeah, I'm curious what that was like for you from your perspective, because
So
I've heard the
for
horror stories
a
from another
very
phys ed
long
teacher, obviously.
yeah, for a very long time, just like every other teacher and almost everybody in general, I was teaching remotely. I was on Zoom or on mainly on Google Hangouts or Google whatever it is with my students, and these are elementary school kids, and I basically became a online fitness instructor for 5 through 11-year-olds, and it was like not anything that I ever signed up for. I mean, everyone had to adapt. Everyone had to go to this new method of teaching where you were keeping everybody safe. And you know, it's the kind of thing where a lot of these really young kids, that online teaching is not really conducive, especially for you know K through 2. I mean, it's hard for them, hard enough for a group of really young kids to pay attention in a classroom and to be engaged as it is, especially in something like phys ed, where they want to, once they get in the gym, a lot of them are excited to be there, which is great. But just sitting in front of their computers and they're doing these exercises with me, this is not meant for little kids. This is something that is good if you're an adult or a college student, you sign up for a fitness class. People, I mean, I think the pandemic made it more common, but before that, people were doing, on like workout videos and stuff. People would work out and watch a video, but that's really more of an adult thing. We had to adapt, and the kids had to adapt, and there's technology in this too, where at least kids now are so used to being on screen, so they were, I think, a lot better about adapting to the new way of doing things than a lot of adults that I know were. So we did it. A lot of the kids, if they weren't able to sign on, or if, let's say, there was like one computer in the house and the parents were using it for work, completely understandable. We were very lenient. We had them do, some of them do activity logs if they weren't able to attend the live classes. So it was definitely an adjustment. There were definitely, I would say, I'm obviously very happy we're teaching in person. And it's mainly like 90% positives about teaching in person. The upsides is that the hardest thing about teaching phys ed is the classroom management, more so than the actual, teaching of the games or the skills or whatever it is that you're doing. The classroom management, having a bunch of kids, they're not sitting at a desk. They're basically it's a bunch of kids in a gym. A gym is a big space. There's a lot of places to run around. There's a lot of moving pieces and kids running and equipment. So I would say the classroom management and just controlling everything is the hardest part. When they're on Zoom, if I want them to be quiet, there's a mute button. It was amazing. Like, the mute button was my favorite part about online teaching, and it's not even close. And I would have 100% rather been there in person with the kids. But having a mute button, and I think I love it for Mafia as well. It's running Mafia is kind of similar to teaching a class of kids sometimes. But having that mute button is great. Not having a commute. I've never been someone who's worked from home before. People did, of course, do it before COVID, and people were used to it. But I had never, not had a commute, and not having a commute, being able to, wake up 30 to 45 minutes before my first class starts, have like a leisurely breakfast and sit down, and, between classes, I sometimes had work to do between classes, but the beginning of the pandemic, I had right before COVID started binging Mad Men. I had never seen it before, so I was sort of late to the party. It had been over for a long time. I realized actually, like, 2 seasons into the show, and this is right when COVID had started, that they were taking Mad Men off Netflix like 2 weeks after that. So I think I had watched the first 2 seasons in like maybe I don't know. I think I watched maybe the first 2 seasons in like 3 weeks or something, which is like not a crazy pace, but it's definitely, I would consider binging it. And then I was like, this is like what, 5 more seasons or 4 more? I don't remember how many seasons it was that I would have to watch in 2 weeks. And I was like, wait a second, I have nowhere to go. So between classes, if I had no other work to do, I would just watch Mad Men. I was constantly, all I did was watch the last like 5 seasons of Mad Men for 2 weeks. And I finished the whole thing.
Wow, it's like, and it's like, it's cool to hear that perspective, and if anything, because I was never a Mad Men person, even as someone who studied marketing, and like I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe one day I'll get there, maybe one day. But it's interesting because, like, you're part of what you were saying. You were talking about classroom management, and my mind went immediately to, as you were explaining what it's like to be a teacher in the classroom management and all these aspects, I just pictured you sitting at like tribal council in the final 3 of a season of Survive, and you're like, well, as a teacher, here's what, like, so on and so. I'm assuming, I don't want to blow up your spot, but I'm assuming you like have, I don't know. I'm curious about your relationship with Survivor, but specifically, I asked Shannon Gus about this. I was like, would you ever play Survivor? Would you ever do it? And she was basically like, no, I would die, which is how I feel. But have you, like, as a super fan, more than a super fan, have you thought about playing? Have you imagined these moments? Have you ever had any, like, dreams or nightmares about, like, the final tribal, or, like, as a teacher?
Yeah. So I will say that I am very happy and satisfied being a super fan and a podcaster of Survivor. Is it something that I think would be amazing to do? Yes. Have I ever applied? Once when I was 19 and I didn't take it very seriously. Nothing ever happened from it. So I've never really, like, it's not my goal. Being on Survivor is not my goal. Now, if I ever decided, you know what, I think I'll send in an application. I got called in for like a second interview, or got to, like, go to casting finals. It sounds like it would be an amazing experience. But again, my life is fine. I have a relationship with the show Survivor that I love. It's created a lot of friendships. It's created sort of a like, like side hustle of podcasting and doing all these trivia games, which is so much fun. And I still get, I've been watching the show since the Australian Outback was actually my first season. I've of course seen Borneo a couple times, but I've been watching the show since 2001, and it's my favorite show of all time. It's the show that I'm definitely the most invested in. I mean, there's other shows that I love, like a Game of Thrones until they ruin the end, and and Breaking Bad and stuff like that, and Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, that I am a huge fan of. But the super fandom that I have with Survivor, like, knows no bounds, and there's a reason why I do the trivia game. It's because I've seen the season so many times, and I like have like studied the strategy and the all the like the contestants that have been on the show, and I love it. And I've, through being a super fan, I've played a couple Survivor live games, and I've played one Survivor ORG, which is an online reality game, and that is fine for me. Like, I've got to live out my my fantasy of, like, putting a vote split together, or blindsiding someone, or playing an idol, getting to the end and losing by one vote. That's not really a fantasy, but that did happen to me once. So I've got to live out a lot of my, like, my desire to play a game like Survivor without actually having to go and be on TV. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a private person. I'm someone who likes to, go out and travel, and I have my friends, and, like, this sort of, like, this, like, presence within the RHAP community, and I love going to know-it-alls, and it's fun when, being recognized by the fans of the podcast when we're at these events. So I wouldn't say I'm a private person, but do I really want to be someone who's on TV where, like, you're really just you're turned into a TV character? I don't think I would hate it. I think there would just be some certain downsides about it as well, where you're now somewhat of a public figure. But of course, it's not like it was, when the show started and you really became a celebrity. That's definitely not something I would want. But I mean, if I ever thought to myself, you know what, I'm gonna fill out an application. Once I found, like, if I would probably, go all in and try as hard as I could to get on. It's just not really my goal.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear all this too, to think about kind of your relationship with Survivor. One, because I could relate to, like, just the aspect of kind of being able to scratch that itch. And I've only done the one live reality game, LRG, with Survivor Philadelphia, Head versus Heart, now on YouTube. But it's interesting, like, when you have that ability to do it and you're like, okay, that's what this could be like for me, or that's like the mini version of this that doesn't involve starving and probably drowning and eating like Jonathan from last season to save my life. So it's interesting to think about that. But I love to, like, dive a little bit deeper with, like, why Survivor has been such a thing for you. Because, Jordan, I'm gonna say it now, no offense, I'm not inviting myself, but I'm just saying, I will never be on This Week in Survivor History because I would make such a fool out of myself, because the facts and data points and information like that just has never been something that's stuck with me all the time. Like, I'm more of like a conceptual, like the feeling of it. Okay, we get it. But for you, you are like this expert when it comes to Survivor. And I'm curious when that passion really started. Like, why was Survivor the thing that really stuck with you? Like to even to this day?
So I think at first, I remember the first episode I ever watched, which was the premiere of the Australian Outback. It was after the Super Bowl one year. I think of course, season 1 had been this phenomenon. So I had heard of it. I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know the premise at all. I was 10. Like I think I was 11 when I started watching, but the first episode ever was the day after my 10th birthday. I'm someone who I mentioned being a sleepaway camp athletic director now, but going all the way back, I was a camper. I was a counselor. Camp is something that I've done most summers of my life. And it was a summer show. I was at camp. We were like so insulated. We weren't following it. We didn't really know that it had become this like great phenomenon, but obviously we came back and people were talking about it. Less so my friends, but like more so, my parents' friends and relatives and stuff. It was just this huge thing. So my mom, I think, had maybe watched a couple episodes during the summer, I think, to see if it was something that she thought was appropriate for me. And she decided it was. And she was like, you know what? I think Jordan would really like the show. And I think at the time when I first started watching, I was very into the characters on Survivor the Australian Outback, which we've since found out not all of them are the greatest people in the world, but we didn't know that back then. And I really remember, being a big fan of Colby. I remember being a really big fan of Mad Dog. I really liked Mad Dog. And unfortunately, two of the people that I was rooting for were Varner and Scoopin, who, when I rewatch it now, I watch it through a much different light. But these are these are people that sort of like jumped off the screen for me, and even Jerry, who I think everyone I think a lot, especially like kids back then, probably saw Jerry as the villain. I remember really liking Jerry, and I think that. I wasn't really thinking about it critically at the time, but I think the Survivor did such a good job back in the day, and I think they've actually started doing it again with some of the more recent seasons. They did such a good job turning these players into characters, but not just like two-dimensional characters. It's characters that really seem like real people, and they are real people. But they showed, they showed them making mistakes. They showed their flaws, and they showed like how they react to different situations, and it's all very realistic. And again, don't think I was thinking about it like this, but I think looking back on me as an 11-year-old, I think a kid could really get something out of that on the show, whether they know what they're really watching or not. I wasn't thinking about the strategy. Going into the first episode, I didn't even know like how the game worked. I didn't know that there was like a tribal council where someone got voted out. I remember they were like going over the bridge to go to tribal council. I was like, is someone going to fall off the bridge? Because like I had no prior experience with reality TV. To me, I've like, you watch a show and sometimes like people like could fall off a bridge or whatever. I don't know. So, but then finally they voted out, spoiler alert, they voted out Deb Eaton. And I was like, oh, this is cool. This is like a cool game. And like, I didn't think about why they voted out Deb. And she was just like, she was just someone who got voted out. And then they kept voting out more people. And I was like, you know what? This is an interesting game. And then you get to the merge and you have like, one try, they merge 5-5 and then there's the, the tiebreaker. And then one, the Ogakor tribe has more people than the Kucha tribe, and they start voting out people on Kucha. And it wasn't a straight pagonging, but it was, you had 3 Ogakors getting to the end. And it's simple math, and I'm not known for my math skills, but it's simple enough math where if you have more votes than somebody else, you're going to win the vote. And I think I got that, as a kid, and like was able to follow the logic of the show. And of course, like every other 11-year-old boy, I was rooting for Colby at the end. I think watching it back now, I think Tina was a much more strategic player and deserved to win. And I still think Colby voting out Keith over her is one of the worst decisions ever. And I get like he was playing more to become like an icon and less so to become a Survivor winner, which I get like there's strategy behind that too. He picked that route, and I think it's worked out. He's had somewhat of a little bit of an acting career and has gone on more seasons of Survivor and was in that movie Red Eye and hosted Top Shot, which was actually on TV the other day. I was like scrolling through and Top Shot was on. I watched like 4 minutes. It was terrible, but he was like, he wasn't bad. He wasn't terrible at hosting. It was just a dumb show.
Yeah.
But
Man,
but
it's interesting though. Like even just with Colby as an example, like that was also the time when it's like just to add to the list of things, babies are named after him, dogs are named after him. Also, so that's like the he was an icon at that time, especially.
There was a house on my street growing up. They had 2 dogs. One was Jeter, named after Derek Jeter, who was also one of my heroes as a kid. And the other dog was Colby, named after Colby from Survivor. Wow. And you hear about like Dr. Mike's son is Ethan, named after Ethan's on. It's I don't know if I would name a kid after a Survivor player, but I mean, it was something that definitely happened, I think, in the early 2000s. There's probably a lot. I don't know if there's a lot of like Mad Dogs who are walking around, but
one day there will be a lot of Mad Dogs.
Yeah, you think there's anyone named Marilyn after Marilyn Mad Dog Hershey?
Yes, I do.
Probably like one person,
maybe
a relative of Marilyn,
and they might be listening too. They're probably, hi Marilyn. They definitely know who you are.
Yeah, Matt's like, you know what, Jordan? We have a surprise. Let's bring her around. We have Marilyn.
Come on down.
The one person named after Mad Dog Hershey.
Look, no. So far, Mad Dog. Look, there's always time. There's always time.
Maybe a pet. Maybe it's more likely that a pet was, especially a dog. If I had gotten
a horrible dog name,
like
Mad
we
dog.
had a dog when Survivor. I actually had the same dog from we got him when I was in first grade, and he died in it was January 20th, 2009, the day that Obama was inaugurated.
Wow.
So we had him for a really long time. But if we had gotten like a girl or a female dog, like after Survivor Australian Outback, I think there's a chance we could have named it Marilyn.
Okay, Marilyn, but not Mad Dog, because
not Mad Dog. No, it would have been Marilyn. I could have seen that. I think I could have convinced my parents to name the dog Marilyn because they were watching the show too. And my dad watched maybe that one season or half of that season. He hates Survivor. My mom loves Survivor and has watched every season to this day. And we watched together until I started going to college. And there's still times. I mean, now I do all the viewing parties in the city, but before that, I would go home. And throughout COVID, Heroes versus Villains, there was we started Heroes versus Villains every week. We were going to the bar. Finally everything shut down because of COVID, and then I basically didn't leave my apartment for 2 weeks. But after that, I was I wasn't sick. My mom and her husband weren't sick, so I would go over there for a week or week and a half at a time, just because I was so bored at my apartment. And Seriously. It was just nicer up there. They have the dogs are there, and it's just more land, and there's other people in the house to interact with. So it was nice to go up and visit, and we would watch Survivor together. I was there almost every Wednesday for Heroes versus Villains.
Yeah, I love that, and I think it's. Look,
not here. I said Heroes versus Villains. I think I said that twice. I meant Winners at
War.
But I think I said Heroes versus Villains twice.
You did. And I was like, first of all, wait a minute. I mean, there's also a world where you could be on Paramount Plus watching Heroes versus Villains.
That's true. Well, it was also on Netflix. I think during this time, and I definitely did watch some of Heroes versus Villains with my mom. My first Survivor viewing party ever was in Manhattan. Her friend's husband worked for did advertising with Comic-Con, and they used to get survivors to come. So he was friends with Russell. No. He was friends with Rupert. And we found out about this viewing party in the city where Rupert was supposed to be there. He wasn't there, which should have been the tip-off that he was going to be voted out that night. He was apparently in a hotel room very close to where we were. But I met Russell Hantz. I have a picture with Russell and my mom. I met Steven and JT that night, and Dave Ball and Billy Garcia. It was a great night. First time I had ever met survivors in person. And I never thought that my life would become hosting these Survivor viewing parties, every week, years later, which I love doing. And we have had Survivor contestants come to the parties, which is always a lot of fun. And then of course, Know-It-Alls is always one of the highlights of the year for me.
Yeah, this actually brings up another point for me, which is that even in the events that I've been to, because it's been over the last year, I've been to a lot of Bryson Wen Presents events. So then there are a lot of former survivors and all. I'm like so curious just knowing what that could be like, and then knowing how prominent you've been in the community. Have you like developed any friendships with survivors or dynamics with certain survivors along the way? Just been like, Kalish, look at you and your seeds, or I don't know, maybe that's Billy I don't know who that's supposed to be.
I don't think Billy Garcia has ever talked about my seeds, but no, I have developed friendships and relationships with different survivors, like some closer than others. Some are just people that, like, when I go to an event, they recognize me or they know me from the podcast and we have a conversation. But there's some people like well, first of all, Rob, who I've been podcast. I mean, that's more just from podcasting than actually Rob. From Survivor. But Karishma is someone who I've become good friends with, and we've actually never met in person, but Karishma played a game of The Circle that I hosted with Naomi Calhoun on at the very beginning of the pandemic. We did a Twitter version of The Circle. Karishma did very well. It was actually the game was actually won by a combination of Puya and Liana. They were first place. Karishma, I think, was second place. And Lirsa is someone who I've known for a few years. And when I was in Boston recently, we went to a baseball game and had dinner. So there are definitely a few survivors that I have become friendly with, and just a couple of them have been on the podcast, and it's always a thrill for me, even if I don't know them super well, that when I've a lot of them who are like kind of the super fan archetype. And Eliza Orleans, I literally like volunteered hours on her campaign for Manhattan District Attorney, and which unfortunately she didn't win, but it was a lot of fun working on the campaign, and she's come to a lot of our Survivor events and Mafia games, and I've gone to her Halloween parties and stuff, and I've played Survivor with like live games of Survivor with Andrea Belke, who I got to blindside at the final 8, which is a very like Andrea place to go out of the game. And Jacob Derwin, who was on a swap tribe that I was on that won 5 challenges in a row. So we never went to tribal together. And then we re-swapped to different tribes, and he got really badly swap screwed. So we never actually got to vote together, but we were supposedly working together. You never know though until you actually vote. So I don't know if we were. I was planning on working with him because I knew he was going to be, as the one survivor in the game, he'd be like a big target.
Yeah. Wow. This is really cool to hear. And I'm not even surprised, but I was expecting when you mentioned Lirsa and Karishma for you to mention knowing them through Black Widow Brigade. I didn't realize there was a pre-existing relationship there with Black Widow Brigade. Alex Gardner. Gardner's game.
Yeah, that was such a fun game. I would say Alex, that game that he put together was so well thought out. It was so much fun. The episodes were great, and it was really he did such a good job combining Survivor and Mafia. And like when I've hosted Mafia, I've put in roles that are named after Survivor contestants, and they're like thematic for something the Survivor did on the show, but it's still Mafia. This is a completely like different game where it really does combine the two in a really creative and great way. And I thought it was a really, really fun game. I won't say just in case someone wants to go back and watch it, I won't say what my role was, but it was a fun role.
No. And if you do want to go back, I would encourage people to go back and watch it. I actually should go back and watch it at some point, because I was podcasting with LaTanya Starks and Grace Leader. We podcasted like 3 episodes. We did 3 podcasts.
I remember that. It was weird hearing people talk about me as like a contestant on something, because I've never had that experience.
That was some of the most fun I've ever had, I think, podcasting. Weirdly enough, like talking about, hey, let me talk about Jordan's strategy, and is he lying, and what's the, that was a lot of fun.
I've never been on any sort of like LRG or org that they've made episodes of. I mean, orgs, I guess, they never really make episodes, but LRGs, there are these games like Survivor New York, and Survivor Philadelphia, where they do episodes, and people will people will talk about it on like the live game podcasts. I've never done ones I've done ones that they filmed, but it's like within a Facebook group, and or it's Facebook Live. They don't make a final product. So there's no one really like analyzing your game and talking about you as a character on the show. So I think that would be a really cool experience. And Survivor New York is a game that like Naomi and I've done production on it, and Naomi and I have talked about me playing at some point. So I think that could come in the future. You never know.
Ooh,
that's a lot more likely than me being on actual Survivor.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know at this point. They might be reaching out to you. You should check your Instagram DMs for that message requests or the spam folder, because that
Jeff Probst is going to be reaching out to me shortly. He'll watch this and we need Kalish on this show.
No, not Jeff. Like Tyler Perry is probably in your DMs.
Okay,
because he knows he really wants you. He really wants you there.
Yeah.
But it's like kind of to pivot a little, because I think that one, it's like cool that you're so involved in the community, or still so involved in the community after falling in love with Survivor. You've mentioned Mafia and hosting different games, but so there's Mafia, and are there other games that you've hosted too?
So I've hosted Mafia. You mentioned Grace Leader before, and we hosted a game called Sleepover Standoff, which we actually wrote to originally be a Rhap episode. And I think we kind of decided that it doesn't, even though we designed it to sort of work as a podcast, it doesn't really, I don't think it would be a great podcast, but I think it was a really good game. And it was a lot of fun working with Grace to come up with the rules of this game, because we sort of took our favorite parts from different reality shows. I mean, I know it was pretty heavily based off of a game that I played called Pick Me, which, if you know the safety chain from Sequester, this is before I had even heard of Sequester. I played a game called Pick Me, which it's basically every round is a safety chain. So there was the game that we came up with was not a safety chain, but there were some aspects of that we took. I don't remember exactly what. I think we had it was a voting type game like Survivor, sort of an election based game where you elect the person who is going to solely eliminate somebody else. So it was very different than Survivor, very different from any game that we had actually seen before. But it was a lot of fun coming up with the rules and testing it. We played it like 4 or 5 times. And after each time, we got to tweak the rules a little. We saw what worked, what didn't work, what was sort of irrelevant. That we had some things in there that didn't end up really playing into the actual game. And we were like, why even have this rule when it doesn't come into play? So we've had some really good winners of this game. I think we tested it 4 times. I will say, unlike until recently, unlike Survivor, it's we've only had female winners, and so it's been dominated by the women that have played at this point, and it's a game that I don't know if we're gonna host it again. It's been a while. We decided, I think, it doesn't really work as a Rhap episode, but it was a lot of fun hosting it. We also did it in the RHAP patron group at one time as like a live like one-off thing, which was fun to do, it was really fun. Like I didn't create Mafia. Mafia has been around forever as a game. I mean, I've added some rules and I have my own like quirks about my Mafia, and I sort of have come up with things that translate well to Zoom. And I really like hosting Zoom Mafia better than in person, even though in person, of course, you get the fun aspect of being with people, but as purely as the person hosting the game, I love doing it on Zoom and having like the private chats with the people with roles. I think it's so much fun.
And I love this because it kind of pivots into something I definitely want to talk about, which is this beyond the games or within the games, or maybe both. Like there's this community that you're engaging with it, and it kind of like it kind of begs the question when I think about your involvement in RHAP, like how did you find RHAP? How and when exactly? I think I know a little bit of this, but I'm curious, like how and when did you find RHAP and start to really get like hooked to this community?
So I started in like, I mean, I've been a fan almost from the beginning.
Yeah.
I think the when I started rewatching episodes, I remember all the seasons used to be on YouTube, and this was like maybe 2008, 2009 or something. And I started rewatching a bunch of seasons on YouTube, and I don't think it was the first time I'd ever rewatched seasons, because I'm pretty sure like my mom had the old like VHS recordings of some of the older seasons. And I'm pretty sure I had rewatched maybe like Outback or Marquesas or something really a long time ago. But this is this is, I guess, when I was when I was first in college. I started like watching a lot of these seasons back on YouTube, and I'm pretty sure I got like this. I mean, Tocantins was airing, or maybe I did it during Samoa. I don't remember really, but I got all the way from like season 1 up to the current point at that time. So it was like 17 or 18 seasons of Survivor that I like binge watched, and I remember thinking like, I had never listened to a podcast before, and I wasn't even going in planning on listening to a podcast, but I think I started like friend requesting certain Survivor contestants, and like that's kind of like weird fan behavior of like, oh, I see these people on a show, let's friend request all these Survivors. And I'm still,
it was a weird time.
Like, yeah, like I didn't really know how social media worked yet,
exactly.
and I wasn't expecting to really even like, you know, connect with these people in any way. I was like, oh, these are, you know, Survivor. They're kind of like real people. I'll friend request them. One of them happened to be Rob Cesternino, who accepted my friend request for some crazy reason. He probably regrets that to this day. And he had posted a link that he and his fiance Nicole at the time were recording a podcast about heroes versus villains. So this was a little bit, I guess, like I had been friends with Rob on Facebook, and during Heroes versus Villains, he posted a link that he was going to like be recapping the season. I was like, oh, this is great. Rob was a really fun Survivor player to watch. And I'm not saying that as someone who thought he was actually Boston Rob. I remembered who Rob Cesternino was. I had seen the season somewhat recently. And I was always a Rob fan on Survivor, a Rob Cesternino fan. So I was like, oh, this should be funny. He was a funny guy. I love the show. I never really listened to anyone analyze it. I had in my head, I had like thought about strategy and like game moves and stuff, but I had never read any of the Survivor media or listened. So I started listening. I was like, this is great. And I think he had like Stephen Fishback on like episode 2 of Heroes versus Villains. And I'm like, this is so much fun. So I listened till there was a point like for years where I don't think I had ever missed a Survivor episode on RHAP. There's so much stuff now that like, I don't know if there's enough hours in the day to listen to like literally everything every week. I try to listen to everything as much as possible, but sometimes I just don't get there because of coaching and everything else that I'm doing after work. But there was a point where I was really listening to everything. And I remember there was a point where he was having like, you know, all these people on the show as guests that he knew from like being an old school Survivor, like a Kathy Vavrick O'Brien and like Earl. He had so many of these people on early on in the podcast. And, you know, it wasn't like he wasn't doing it professionally yet, but I just loved listening to these interviews. And I would listen at the gym. I would listen when I was driving. I went through late high school, I went through like a World of Warcraft phase where I was playing that game. And I think it permeated maybe a little bit into my first year of college. So I would like play World of Warcraft and listen to Rob talk about Survivor, which is like the nerdiest sentence I've ever said. And I was like, this is so cool. And it like I would post, there used to be like the comment section on Rob has a website, and I would like write comments, and like sometimes like Rob would read them, and that was always cool. And like people would like respond, and I think my people like started to know my name on the podcast because my comments would get read, or like it was just in the chat and people would like respond or whatever. And I think I reached out to Rob. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I reached out about writing a blog. He had just started having people blog for the site. And I think at that time there were already a couple Survivor bloggers. So he was like, do you want to write a blog about the Celebrity Apprentice? Which I had watched maybe the first, I used to love The Apprentice. Like I used to watch the actual Apprentice show. Yeah. And I don't know what ever happened to the guy who was hosting that, but
never. Who cares?
So I used to love The Apprentice, and I think I had maybe seen like the first or the second Celebrity Apprentice, but I sort of stopped watching it. RHAP got me back into it, and the podcast was always a lot of fun to listen to. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll blog about it. It was just like a kind of a way in the door, and like I never blogged before, so it was fun writing about a show. And I was writing about the Celebrity Apprentice, and I think I did it for like 2 seasons. And then at some point, I think I had said to Rob, like, I don't even remember if the Celebrity Apprentice was continuing at that point, and I was just sort of, it wasn't really so interested in writing about it. And I was like, Rob, I know you have people writing about Survivor. What if I come up with like a different angle? And he was like, yeah, if you come up with an idea that we're not currently doing, you could do it as a blog. So I was like kind of thinking, and I was like, I like all these old seasons. Like I've been watching the show forever. What if I start writing something about the older seasons? And then the first time I met Rob in person, which was at a filming of the Reality Game Masters YouTube series, which was hosted by my friend Alex Forstenhauser, who I didn't know at the time. I met him that day too. I met Rob in person, and I think I had been on the podcast, on the Celebrity Apprentice podcast, twice at that point. So I had spoken to him, but we never met in person. And we went to the bar after, and maybe it was just like the lobby of like the place where they filmed this YouTube series. And I said, Rob, you wanted me to come up with a new idea for a blog. All the blogs are about the current season. What if I do This Week in Survivor History and write about things that happened this week in Survivor history from the old season. So Twish really started as a blog, and it was a blog, I think, for maybe a season or 2 seasons. And then at some point, Rob asked if I wanted to like make it a, kind of either a one-off or a potentially recurring podcast segment. But it wasn't something that was every week at that point. It became that after a little while.
Wow. Yeah. And it's cool to even like think of the process and the journey to that point where you are like, where it actually is like something that could stand alone, where people are like, oh my gosh, this week in Survivor history, what happened? And do I remember what happened? Like, again, for me, it's always so interesting because I'm like, can I keep up? What do I know? But then there's so much that I learn or not even learn, but am reminded of from This Week in Survivor history. And I think one of my favorite parts has been, in the evolution of This Week in Survivor history, because we've seen different versions
in many forms. Yeah.
With Rob there as like, we've seen with guests, we've seen like the kind of panel game show format almost. But I think one of my favorite things is just seeing people, like whether it's actually on the podcast or people who listen to the podcast, like reacting and interacting with it. And, like the fact that there are people who are super fans of Survivor enough to not only like listen to the recap during a Survivor season, listen to the recaps during the many recaps during the Survivor season, from know-it-alls to like the feedback show and like so on and so forth, but then also want to dive into the trivia and geek out about that. Like that's one of the things that I love the most about this community, that there's space to nerd out, because even like you mentioned, playing the time when you played World of Warcraft while also listening to RHAP, and I'm like, Jordan, there's so many people who could probably like, I'll give you something that's nerdier, like holds my my gaming headset, if you will, so I think that's pretty awesome. And this is like the thing that I think that is so interesting to me about you, where you are in the community, and where I'm not yet, but where I hope to evolve in the community, is just being so engaged with the community over time. Like Pod Friends is a community focused podcast, but at the same time, like there are definitely I don't know, like there are people like you who've been around and you go out of your way to like connect with this RHAP community. You host games with people because of the games, but also like complete strangers who are like, hey Jordan, I want to be part of this. And so I'm curious, like, why does engaging with the community in that way appeal to you? Because I could also picture a world where you're like, hey everybody, I'm here, I'm doing my podcast, okay, peace out, see you next Survivor season. But obviously that's not who you are or how you show up.
So I think for me, like the social aspect of the podcast it's just as important to me, maybe even more important than actually recording the podcast. I mean, that's how I got in, but I think to myself, even if I had never started podcasting with RHAP, I'd be someone who's part of the community on like the patron calls and doing all that stuff, going to know-it-alls, of course, and living in New York, you're definitely have an advantage with that because so many live shows have been hosted here. So I would definitely be someone who's going to these live shows for sure. And I think a lot of these friendships that I have, I would have developed even if I wasn't a host. But I think being a host on the show, it's like you go into these know-it-alls. It could be an overwhelming situation because it's a lot of it, you go for the first time. Most likely it's going to be a lot of strangers. My first time that I went to like that Reality Game Masters taping, it was sort of like a good opening because people had either heard me on the Celebrity Apprentice podcast or knew who my name was just from like kind of becoming like somewhat of a name like in the community, where it was a good icebreaker. It was like an easy way to talk to people. And I think a lot of people who go to these live shows, it's a very welcoming community. So I think it's sort of like maybe the shock wears off for people, but some people are, either more shy than others or less likely to try like connect with people in a big group. So I think having the advantage of being somewhat of a known quantity helped me develop these relationships that I've made in person. And it's not just acquaintances. Like these, again, like I said, a lot of my really close friends. So there is that aspect. And I'm just someone I like to get to know people. I like to make friends with people. I think, people have asked me if I did go on Survivor, how do I think I would do? And I think, anyone could, I don't know, but if anyone could win or if anyone could be, I think anyone could be a first boot. But I think
Right.
The one thing where I might do well is I think I'm like pretty quick to connect with people. And I think that's something that's a good skill in Survivor. Look, I could go in and, maybe I just wouldn't gel with my tribe. I could be the first boot. You never know. But if I did ever go on Survivor and somehow win, I think it would be because I made good relationships with people and, hopefully played a good strategic game as well. But I think it's sort of one and the same to me, where I think you can't really enact any strategies if people don't trust or like you. So I think that's, I just like going back to the RHAP community. I think in general, I like to get to know different people, and maybe like going back, and I've never really connected the two, but going back to the fact that like so many of my close friends are from like my close, tight knit community of the small public school that I went to. And I had like basically the same group of like 6 to 10 like really close friends growing up that I'm still really good friends with. Maybe I sort of like saw this RHAP community as a way to like expand my horizons and meet people from not just different states, but different countries and different cultures. And I think maybe that's really what, helped me make these relationships, because I may have been like, striving to make new relationships with people. And again, through like, through college and, transferring a couple times and changing majors, I had friends in college, but there's really no one that I'm close with from my college days now. So maybe if when people tell me what college, RHAP University, that was my, these are my college days. You're one of my college buddies, Matt.
Yeah, from the Survivor Academy. Exactly.
Uh-huh.
It's awesome, cool. It's really cool too to think about that, because I mean, for me personally, like I only really, as much as I listened, really from like 2017 onward, I only really interacted with the community, because there are so many people, like I'm sure, who listen to this, who listen to you, of course, and like they listen and that's it. But my interaction only started with the pandemic, and then I think about the times that I've met people at some of these Bryson Wen Presents before RHAP was back with the live shows and all of that stuff. And just like I think there's even something especially awesome about being able to connect in this world where like we literally, for a lot of us, we just don't have the same level of social interaction we had, or we didn't, obviously, for a while as things shut down. And so I think there's something especially cool about what you do within the community, whether it's like actual in-person watch parties and events and the like, or these like virtual things with Mafia and all, because it really gives people a chance to like connect and I mean, in a way, I always credit Bryce Isaiah with like the phrase "friend in your head," though.
Yeah. I think that is 100% his.
I'm gonna give it to. I don't know if it like started somewhere else, but I'll give it to Bryce. Friend in my head. Like for so many people, it's cool that that you, that me, that like all of us are able to be friends in the heads of so many different listeners too. But it's cool also that like even cooler when you have the chance to interact and like take that out of the listening space and take it to like a two-way relationship. And so I want to ask, like, is there just I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will ask, any shout outs, any gratitudes, any thank yous to anyone specific, anyone in general, when it comes to this Rob Has a Podcast community that's kind of that you've helped build and that's also kind of built up around you?
Well, I would say that, I mean, the person who started this and posted on their Facebook page was Rob. And without Rob, obviously it's Rob Has a Podcast, the community wouldn't exist. And not to throw out an old RHAP expression here. I'm not trying to suck kneecaps, but yeah. You don't know about sucking kneecaps?
I've heard Rob. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Jordan.
You need to have been around RHAP in like 2011 or 12 or something to get the sucking kneecaps thing. I forgot exactly how it started, but yeah, I throwing Rob's name out as an obvious name here, but without him, I don't really have this outlet. I don't really have this, there's other people who podcast and talk about Survivor, and maybe I would have found that down the road, but I can't imagine another Survivor based community, or at least reality TV based community, being as great as RHAP has been for me, and just making as many friends as I have, and the fact that there's so many people again in the New York area really helps too. I mean, I mean, it's good that the podcast has grown so much now that I think even if you're from like, somewhere in the middle of the country, or maybe it's a little bit more rural or less populated, you could probably still find somebody somewhat near you. But, having this great base in the city is amazing. So Rob is definitely someone who I need to give a shout out to. I would say my mom is someone, she's the one who introduced me to Survivor in the first place and watched with me for years and still watches. And like, we have long conversations about Survivor on the phone, and she listens to the podcast. She's a patron. Wow. She's one of these like kind of invisible patrons. She doesn't post anywhere. I think she might, I don't even know if she's in the Facebook group. But she loves like, she loves listening, and I don't know if she listens to every single Survivor podcast that's out there, but she tries to listen to the recap every week, and she's a little biased, but she's a Twitch listener. So that's always good. So I would say, so Rob, just, in terms of, being part of this community. And then I'm going to shout out a whole group of people, which I would call like the, it started out as like the New York Pizza and Beer Alliance, which is just all the people in New York City that get together in the city. And, that's how my Mafia obsession started. We started playing Mafia together after Survivor. Like I think we'd sometimes played on nights that Survivor wasn't on as well. So all of my friends who I've been to, some of their weddings at this point, and they've come to my house for football. And it's really like close friendships. It's not, if any of us stopped watching Survivor, we'd still be friends and we'd still have a lot in common. So the whole like New York, pizza and beer, and like, just people who I've become close friends with through that, I would have to give a shout out to also.
First of all, just seconding the shout out to the New York Pizza Beer Alliance, shout out to Rob Sesterino, shout out to Mama Kalish, and
Blake Towsley from Survivor Guatemala, who's I think one of the greatest Survivor characters of all. Not just kidding. That's a that's a Twitch reference.
I was like, sure, curveball.
Yeah, Babe Blake is still one of my favorite Twitch moments of all time. You have to be there to know what I'm talking about.
I didn't think he was going to get a shout out, so there we go.
He's never gotten a shout out before on anything until this.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is the first. We're making history here, Jordan.
Yeah.
And speaking of history, your history, and maybe about the seeds that you are planting, that you've planted for the future and the past. I always ask people at the end of this, if your life were a book or documentary, what would the title be and why? And I'm so curious because like there's so much that you've talked about. We could be here for like so many more hours breaking it all down. But like, how would you kind of sum it up? And it could be either focused on where you've been, which I think is kind of how most people answer that, or it could be like focused on where you're kind of going as an option.
So I think that's an interesting
baby
question.
Is an obvious one.
Yeah, that's too like you put that on the shelf. People are going to be like, "Oh, this is just going to be a book full." Like they might think it's like a recipe book.
Or like something about like a tree planting book, for instance.
Yeah, I don't think that would be great marketing. I think it's good on the T-shirt. We have a nice logo that that's on like the merch, but I don't know if that's really going to be the name of the book. What would it be called? Like maybe you could help me out with this. I don't know if I'm good at like titling things.
I can try.
So my book,
yes.
So I'm a
just
teacher. I'm a teacher. Yeah, I'm a coach. Coach was on Survivor, but I don't think my book should be about Coach Wade. Like,
definitely not.
No. What about? Man, I'm trying to blank here. I remember seeing the question. I was thinking about it, and I never ended up coming to a solution in my head.
This is interesting. So, like, if you like, let's just break it down beyond the title. Yeah. What would you talk about in the book?
Oh, I think I would definitely talk about. I mean, again, if this is the book about my Survivor journey or about my life.
Your life.
My life. Okay, so I think the podcasting and being a Survivor fan is such a big part of my life that it might be it would be maybe a couple chapters and it would definitely be part of it. But I think a lot of what my book would be about would be just coaching. I coach cross country, which is a sport that I didn't play. And it's been the most successful team that I've coached. And I've really I was sort of put into this by the school that I work at. I was actually, I think they had me on coaching like JV tennis, which it's a small private school. And they sometimes it's hard to sometimes find a coach for some of these positions, and they'll just get someone like baseball's my main sport.
Yes.
I played it growing up. I have coached it for a long time, and I'm definitely qualified to coach baseball. I was not qualified really to coach tennis. When I started coaching tennis, it was the JV team, and I was mainly just running the workouts with them. The varsity coach was doing more of the actual tennis lessons. And again, once a tennis match starts, there's not so much in-game coaching that you're doing. So it worked out, and the kids liked me. It was actually a girls tennis team, and it was a really like nice group of kids that I was working with, so I enjoyed it. But then the following year, there weren't enough kids for JV tennis. My athletic director got an email from a few parents asking about starting up a cross country team. And I was like, okay, I'll go from this one sport that I don't really know to this other sport that I don't really know, but I know how to run a practice. I know how to like create a good team environment. I'll coach it. I ended up loving it. I had like 7 kids on that team the first year. Now we've like doubled it. Now we're at 14 kids. The first year we were unaffiliated. We were not in a league. The league meet for the league that we would have been on a Saturday, and our school doesn't compete on Saturdays because of Shabbat. So the next year we joined the league. They accommodated us, and they moved the league meet to the middle of the week. And for the last 2 years, we've won the league. We have a banner in the gym now that has our league championships, and we have we had a meet yesterday against the other teams in our league, and I would say that we're probably projected to win the league for a third year in a row. We also went to sectionals last year in upstate New York, and we were the runners up in our conference after having never competed. And they actually made an exception to let us compete on Saturday because we stayed in a hotel the night before and actually walked to the race. Like if we couldn't use transportation or electricity or anything, but we were allowed to walk to the race. And there are different levels of Judaism would be okay with this. Some wouldn't be. This is a conservative school. So it's sort of in the middle where they observe Shabbat, but since the kids weren't using technology, they weren't doing other activities that they wouldn't be able to do on Shabbat. They were able to do it. We walked like 2.5 miles before our race, and we came in second in the whole section, which is a bunch of schools. And this year, the goal is to win sectionals and hopefully qualify for the state tournament, which we had a couple kids go to states last year, but to qualify as a team, you have to win sectionals. So this is a long-winded answer to what would my book title be. So I think there's like something that like one of the things that I like to do is like, if there's a situation where maybe I'm not 100% sure if I am really like confident about doing something, but I'll try to embrace the situation. I'll try to succeed as best as possible and learn about it. And like, I did a lot of reading about cross country coaching and how to structure a practice and what's the different, what are the different, workouts and all the running that like how much running should we be doing before a meet or after a meet or, different forms of training. And so all the kids on my team, every kid that I've had has improved their 5K time. So like it's worked. And I think maybe I think a lot of the book would be about that, about things that I've done either through teaching or coaching that have worked out. And I would definitely put some of the things that I've had to change too, because I've there have been times where, especially early on, you sort of learn about what games work and what styles of teaching work with different grades and different ages. And, every kid is so different from every other kid that you really have to structure all your lessons around the classes that you have. So I don't know what the title would be, but I think that's what a lot of it would be about.
I don't know. It's interesting, like listening to you though, it's like very interesting. And like, it would be really interesting for me to even go back and break it down. Cause again, there's so much more we could dive into, but Jordan, like I'm seeing in terms of a title, and I don't have it right now, but like I'm seeing Coach Kalish is a thing. You're the Coach Carr type and Coach Kalish.
Yeah. My kids call me the kids call me Coach K, but I think if I wrote a book about Coach K, they would probably think it's about the Duke Coach K and not. I think Coach Krzyzewski maybe is a little bit more well known than Coach Kalish at this point, but that's what they call me. Yeah,
Coach Kalish is good.
I'll do it.
Or but then there's also other stuff. Like there's definitely something with Jordan and then Michael Jordan. We could probably like steal a title of something that he's been involved
what
in.
Middle name is, Matt?
What?
Michael.
What?
Yep. Switch it around, Michael Jordan.
It's like Kalish Jordan Michael. Or wait, no, Kalish Michael Jordan. What?
Kalish Michael Jordan. That doesn't sound like a book about.
We've talked about middle names on like a couple. I interviewed
What's your middle name?
Toby, and I was talking with Azza about middle names because Azza's middle name is also coincidentally Toby, which is like, what are we doing? What are we doing here? So, and I'm also just seeing a lot of S's in your title. So, I mean, if I was going to come up with a title for you, it might be like Coach Kalish, Seeds, Shabbat, Sports, and Survivor. But then I also wrote down like structure in schools, and then you could also throw in students. So maybe just like
students,
Coach Kalish, and then like a lot of S words.
Just a tagline. Yeah.
Basically. Siege, Shabbat, Sports,
Seeds,
Survivor, Structure,
I would say Seeds. I think 3 is a good number. I would go like Seeds, Survivor,
thank you,
Sports. Or maybe Survivor, Sports, Survivor, Seeds. Coach Kalish, Sports, Survivor, Seeds. And people would be, you like Seeds, you like bagels, you could pick up this book. You like Survivor, Sports. A lot of people like sports. It's a book for everyone. I
mean, honestly, you do want everyone to buy your book, even if they pick it up for the wrong reasons. So
or maybe should the book be called Everything? It could be.
It took us a while to get there.
I think the book is called Everything. And it's just, each of my different things that I'm involved with, the mafia and everything. It's each of them are a seed on the bagel.
Wow.
We solved it, Matt.
I love it. We figured this out. We made it happen. We're doing it. We need to end on a high note, Jordan. This is it. Jordan, any closing words for the people listening or not listening? Any wisdom words?
Well, I hope that if you're someone who's been, listening to the podcast, I hope you enjoyed this like journey down the other parts of my life that have, I think, been mentioned, but they've never really been delved into this deeply. Yeah. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope that it was an interesting thing for you to listen to, because look, I'm not someone who's had like, I would say a lot of like crazy experiences in my life, or like, I've traveled, but I haven't had any like, insane adventures. And I think I've had sort of like a even keeled life, and I've sort of lived within the same, like either in or near the New York City suburbs my whole life. So it's not like I've lived anywhere crazy, but I hope if you listen to this, you maybe get a couple more pieces of the puzzle and like can see why I'm so into, I think the teaching and hosting trivia and hosting Mafia, there's a lot of similarities between all of those things. And I think part of it is just sort of like being the facilitator, like being not necessarily in charge, but being the person who's like kind of, organizing and keeping everything together. And I think that's kind of what I like to do. What I liked about being a teacher is that the first day that you walked in, I mean, you have like, you have your superintendent, you have your principal, your assistant principal, but the first day of school that you're in there, you're in that room with all the kids, you're the boss, you're in charge. And there's very few jobs that are like that, unless like you start your own business or something, where the first day you could be in a room full of 20 something people and you're in charge. And I think that appealed to me.
I love that, Jordan. You're seeding the future.
Oh my God.
You're I'm just thinking of other titles. Seeding the future.
The seeds. Oh my God. They all sound horrible.
I'd say, we'll work on it.
The seed is strong, but that's kind of stolen from
the
from
seed
Game of Thrones.
Is strong, and that's a great note to end on, Jordan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt, for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this very fun conversation with Jordan. And one of the things I'm most proud of from this is that Jordan tweeted after we recorded that possibly this episode was home to his funniest joke on a podcast. I know I laughed hard, as you could tell. Jordan broke me a few times with some of what he shared, and I just love getting to see that side of him, even beyond the Survivor trivia, beyond the Mafia games, beyond what we might see most of the time. And if you want to see more and get to know more people, if you want to make sure that you're tuned in for the next episode featuring the one and only Stephen Fishback, just subscribe at robhasawebsite.com/podfriendsfeed. But thank you to everyone behind the scenes who makes this possible. Big thanks to Will from America for the theme song, Scott St. Pierre, Tricky Rice, Sam Moore, Chelsea Lester, Jill, shout out to you, Rob, shout out to you for making this all possible. And again, thank you to the listeners for being here and for being on the journey. I'm so grateful for you. I love to hear from you. Tweet me at MattScottGW. Tweet Jordan at Jordan Kalish. Tweet Podfriends at HeyPodFriends. And as I say at the end of each and every Podfriends episode, thank you for being a Podfriend.